From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Washington and New York this evening, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern.
He got the prize. Now can he handle the caucus? Speaker Mike Johnson's first full day holding the gavel, including a visit to the White House and a meeting with the president.
A blowout US GDP report, smashing expectations with the fastest growth pace in almost 2 years.
Our guest today, Republican Congressman Buddy Carter of Georgia, on the new speaker, and Council of Economic Advisors Chair Jared Bernstein on the GDP numbers. Anne-Marie, it's good to see you up there in New York. An interesting day today here in the nation's capital as this gentleman from Louisiana wakes up as speaker for the first time in his life. And I'm curious to know what he heard today, Anne-Marie, at the White House. Probably some things he never thought about before he got this job. Absolutely. Reality is setting in, and there's some incredibly big problems that he needs to deal with, not just domestically, Joe, when you have a government shutdown, November 17th, potentially. Shalonda Young was one of those individuals he met at the White House. But Jake Sullivan, President Biden's national security advisor, was also in that meeting. What did he hear about some of the biggest threats the world faces today? Yeah, I'm sure it was a sobering experience, as we know, now second in line to the presidency. And joining us here in Washington at the table to continue our conversation, Bloomberg's Megan Scully and Gregory Cordy. It's great to see you both. Megan, this is an individual whose life just changed a lot. Yeah. And I suspect that this is a sobering experience, a reality check for him to go to the White House and get a national security briefing like that, things he would not have heard as a congressman before today. But I wonder to what extent he's going to be able to work with this president. I think we can argue that the new speaker is more conservative than the last.
He certainly is. He's the most conservative speaker in modern times. I've heard some estimates of going back, generations, essentially. And so it's going to be interesting to see this dynamic play out, especially with this shutdown risk just 3 weeks away now. He is he being Speaker Johnson, of course, is incredibly conservative, not only economically and in terms of advocating for small government, but also much further to the right than even the majority of his party in terms of social issues like abortion and same-sex marriage. So it's going to be very interesting to see how he navigates where he is politically with the narrow House majority that he is leading and trying to negotiate with the Democratic-led Senate and the president.
Someone actually quipped to me yesterday that when they took down Speaker McCarthy's plaque above the Speaker's office, that it should have been a little bit center-right, given where this individual's politics lie. But we also heard from House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries on the new Speaker.
I look forward to an open, an honest, a communicative, and forward-looking relationship where we'll understand that we will agree to disagree with each other, but without being personally disagreeable. However, as House Democrats have made clear from the very beginning, we're going to push back against extremism whenever necessary.
Greg, you hear from Hakeem Jeffries talking about an honest, open conversation. It's an individual the Democrats need to work with. This is a split, a divided government. Do you think Hakeem Jeffries and Mr. Johnson can have a working relationship and actually legislate?
Well, I think we're still in the honeymoon phase where there is a little bit of some goodwill, maybe, perhaps. I think the speaker said all the right things, at least in terms of getting the body back to work yesterday. Of course, he also then talked about some issues about the border that might be a little bit more controversial. But look, this is a speaker who has a lot of work to do coming in. We've had changes of speaker before, but usually it's at the beginning of the year where the speaker then has some time to set the agenda. This speaker comes in right in the middle of a legislative agenda that he's got to get done by the end of the year, including spending bills. He's got a couple of supplemental spending bills on top of the regular appropriations process. We've got a defense authorization bill. We've got a whole lot on his plate. And by the way, he's got some contentious votes right out of the gate with a vote to possibly expel George Santos, the Republican from New York, from the House. You've got some Republicans who want to censure some Democrats for some things that they've said and done. And so it's still a very partisan House, and we'll see how that carries over.
I want to hear from you, Gregory, on the George Santos matter. But Hakeem Jeffries today, Megan, issued, I guess, a challenge to the new speaker to take shutdown off the table for the rest of, I'm assuming he means this session, not just this year. Is that actually going to happen? The speaker has warmed up to the idea of a continuing resolution, and the caucus seems to be following it.
Yeah, so Speaker Johnson, surprisingly, 2 days before he was elected, floated this plan to House Republicans, basically saying, I support either a continuing resolution, this temporary spending bill, until January or until April. What was so shocking...
wide window.
A wide window, yes. But what was really surprising about this was that a continuing resolution, which is what got us to the problems with
Kevin McCarthy.
Kevin McCarthy, yeah. So, and now these same Republicans who opposed that back in October, which averted the government shutdown then, seem to support it now. Now, the devil's going to be in the details, right? Because what was not mentioned in his memo was the level of cuts that he would advocate on the longer-term spending bills, the level of spending for Ukraine, what we would send to Israel, and these are all things that are going to be difficult to negotiate.
Well, Megan, because this is exactly the reason why Speaker McCarthy lost his job, this just says to me that this feels more personal. At some point, are the far right, or these 8 or a dozen that potentially were pushing for Speaker McCarthy to vacate, at some point, are they going to turn on Speaker Mike Johnson?
So we have a couple of dynamics playing out here. I think part of it is that these hardliners, these 8 Republicans who combined with Democrats to vote out Speaker McCarthy just 3 weeks ago, they never trusted him from the get-go. They didn't like him in January. They were among the same ones who forced him to go 15 rounds to get elected. Now, Mike Johnson comes in. He is more conservative. So they might be willing to tolerate more from him than they were from Speaker McCarthy. We'll see. But like Greg mentioned, it's a honeymoon period we're in right now. So we could be talking a very different game here in just a few weeks if he cuts a deal with the president that they don't like. What I have been saying is all it takes to overthrow a speaker in this instance is a car full, a Honda Civic full of Republicans. So this is how narrow that we're looking at, and it's going to be even smaller if they do expel George Santos.
Wow. Reminding us, yes, that every vote counts.
Every vote counts.
And so we've got a headline on the terminal. Gregory Cordy has the byline: George Santos faces expulsion vote in the U.S. House next week. The New York delegation is mobilized on this. What's going to happen?
Yeah, well, Santos himself isn't quite so sure that he can survive this one. He survived a vote to expel before when Kevin McCarthy saved him by sending it to committee. Then that was a party line vote. Now we've had the New York Republican delegation, which is largely brand new members of Congress who are in very competitive districts who have to worry about next year. They've turned on their colleague from Long Island and introduced this resolution now that under the rules of the House has to be voted on within 2 legislative days. If it's a bipartisan vote, there could be a jailbreak because no Republican member wants to go. I mean, this guy's notorious, right? I mean, he's been the subject of Saturday Night Live sketches. He's a national punchline. Even in faraway districts, people know who George Santos is, and probably not a good vote to be standing up for George Santos back home.
Anne-Marie, are you telling me Republicans are going to actually do this and lose a vote in this narrowly divided House?
Well, that's the issue. I think what Greg brings up a great point. If you are individuals surrounding one of those districts, like Congressman D'Esposito, how do you go back to your constituents and say, of course, I'm going to not vote of course I'm going to bring up this expulsion, because they have family, friends in the neighboring district. And if you think people around the country know about George Santos, for sure, he is very well known in Long Island. Gregory, quickly, what happens to his district? Who represents these people?
Yeah, well, under the Constitution, you have to have a special election. We sometimes think about the Senate, the governor can appoint somebody in the meantime. That's not true in the House. There has to be a special election. Governor Kathy Hochul is going to have to call the date of that within the next few months. And it's a Biden-leaning district. That's the big problem here. So that as soon as you do have a special election, it's very likely that a Democrat wins that seat, and that narrows the Republican advantage in the House even more. And we've seen how precarious the Republican majority is already.
I think he's listening to us. George Santos tweeted while we were talking, 3 points of clarification. I have not cleared out my office. I am not resigning. And I'm entitled to due process and not a predetermined outcome as some are seeking. God bless. Big thanks to Bloomberg's Megan Scully and Gregory Cordy. A great conversation, as always, on Balance of Power. Coming up, we continue the conversation on the next move in Congress with Georgia Republican Buddy Carter. That's next, only here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. The House of Representatives back in action today with the election of a new speaker at last. Funding for Ukraine, for Israel, plus a looming government shutdown, all on a very busy agenda now. And joining us to get into this now for more, Republican Congressman Buddy Carter of Georgia. Congressman, it's good to see you and welcome to Bloomberg. I wonder your thoughts on priorities here and whether you're prepared to vote for a continuing resolution if the Speaker, as he suggests, will bring one to the floor.
Well, it looks as if that is going to be the case. We just finished passing another appropriation bill, which is a good thing. That makes the fifth, and now we're well over 70% of the entire discretionary budget. So we're making progress, but it is going to be a heavy lift to get the rest of those bills done before November 17th. And looks like we might have to have some type of stopgap funding. Speaker Johnson has indicated that that may be his wish and that he may propose that. So, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it and see how things go. I did vote for the last CR, and I want to make sure that, no one wants the government to shut down. We don't want that to happen. However, that's not the worst thing that can happen. The worst thing that can happen is for us to continue with this reckless spending in Washington, D.C. that has led to $33.5 trillion in debt. That is the biggest threat to our democracy right now, and that is our debt. The interest on our debt is going to exceed the amount of money that we spend on defense. That's inexcusable. So we've got to do something about spending. And again, a government shutdown is something that nobody wants, but it's not the worst thing that could happen.
That's right. In 2050, around then, our top line of our budget will be paying the interest of our debt. But, Congressman, you said you want to deal with this when we cross that bridge. That bridge, a potential government shutdown, is in 3 weeks. Would you prefer the January idea of a CR or April to actually have time to get these appropriation bills done?
Well, both of them have their advantages. Obviously, I'd prefer the shortest possible. January would be that, and I do think that we can get it done in that period of time. April, is a long ways off, and I'd hate to think that we continue on with the Democratic policies that are part of this budget right now during that period of time. If we can get this done in January, then I think that'd be a lot better for us, because that means that we can get our Republican priorities and Republican policies in that budget.
Sounds like you want a shorter leash on that, Congressman. There's the matter of the supplemental budget request as well. And I know this is where things start to get a little bit more complicated, because the White House wants to attach funding for Israel, for Ukraine, for Taiwan, and for border security, and something that will add up to more than $100 billion. I know that there's a preference by some in the Republican caucus in the House to bring Israel funding to the floor alone. Is that the next move that you want to see?
It is the next move that I want to see. Look, we support Israel. We just passed a resolution. The first thing that we did when we got our new speaker in, immediately we passed that resolution supporting Israel, condemning Hamas and that terrorist group. We want to make sure Israel has got the financial support, the military, the weapon support, I should say, that they need.
Yeah.
Now, we want Ukraine to be successful too. We do not want Putin to win, but these have to be separate. We've got to vote on them separate. I think it's somewhat ingenuous for the president to think that he can send it over here as one package. Look, there are many in our conference who are concerned and don't want to be sending a blank check. As far as Ukraine is concerned, we need to see a plan. We need to see a plan on how this is going to end. We need to make sure Europe's doing their part. We need to have accountability. We need to make sure we never have any American troops on the ground over there. So those are things.
Does Israel get a blank check?
Well, I'm not sure about a blank check, but Israel needs our help, and we're going to defend Israel. And look, I'm not downplaying the importance of Ukraine by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think that anyone should get a blank check without some kind of accountability. And that's what we want to make sure. But we need to get aid to Israel as soon as possible.
Well, right now what we have is a Republican majority, sir, as you know, but there is this potential that that majority is going to get whittled down. There is this vote next week for the expulsion of George Santo, representative of Long Island, and his own New York Republicans. Congressman D'Esposito is saying it's going to catch like wildfire among other House members. Are you going to be one of those members?
Well, I haven't made that decision yet, and certainly George Santos deserves to have his due process, and he will get that. I will tell you that this is a slim majority that we have, and losing that seat would be even slimmer, but we can't really base it on that. Our decision has to be based on what has happened and what the allegations are, if they're true or not. Look, it's an honor and a privilege to serve in Congress, and something that we should all take very seriously. I know I do.
Well, he's charged with stealing people's identities, making charges on his own donors' credit cards. You know how serious that is, given the fact that I don't think your donors would be too happy with you. If these allegations are true, would you vote to expel him?
If they're proven true, there's no question where I'm going to vote. That cannot be tolerated, not here nor anywhere, but especially not in the House of Representatives.
Congressman, I'd like to hear from you on the new speaker. A lot of folks are just getting to know him, and it strikes me that you guys actually have a lot in common, particularly when it comes to social politics. You see eye to eye on issues like abortion, on same-sex marriage. And I wonder, including your faith for that matter, if you see this and if our viewers should see this as a move to the right, a more conservative-leaning Republican conference today.
Well, I do think it is an indication of that, because Mike Johnson is a strong conservative. He's a strong Christian. He's also a constitutional expert. I mean, this is a guy who for 20 years practiced constitutional law and actually defended cases successfully, I might add. And you know, that's very important for us to note that we've got someone in this position with that kind of experience. Mike Johnson is a lot of things, but perhaps the most important thing, I think, is that he's a good guy. And he has unified this caucus. He has brought us an optimistic and bright tone that we needed. And I really do feel like that God has put him in this place. I'm a strong believer, and I believe that you know, God controls what happens, and I really do believe that he's put Mike Johnson in this position, and I look forward to serving with him and look forward to his time as our speaker.
Jake Sherman wrote that this is the most least experienced House of Representatives speakers in the post-Civil War era. How do you think he's trying to ramp up the experience of this very difficult job?
Well, I think that puts the omen on us in our conference, that we've got to make sure we're helping him. And Mike is smart enough to know that you got to surround yourself with good people and let them go at it. And that's what he intends to do. I think you'll see a shift. He's already indicated that he's going to be depending on chairmen of committees, that he's going to be depending on all of us to help him. You're right, he is somewhat inexperienced, but I don't think it's going to take him long to get going. But at the same time, even when he does get going, I think he'll still adhere to the philosophy of bottom up, and that's what he wants. That's the type of leadership that he wants.
All right, Congressman Buddy Carter of Georgia, thank you so much for your time. Coming in the program, we're going to look at the blowout US GDP number. This is Bloomberg.
It's a good, strong number, and it shows an economy that's doing very well. Let's remember it is just one quarter's number, and I'm not expecting growth at that pace to continue, but we do have good, solid growth. What we have looks like a soft landing with very good outcomes for the U.S. economy.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen speaking at Bloomberg with our bureau chief Peggy Collins earlier today after this morning's strong U.S. GDP data. Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons is here with more context. Kayleigh.
Yeah, Anne-Marie, it was incredibly strong, much stronger than economists expected. 4.9% growth in the third quarter. That is the fastest pace of expansion we have seen going back pretty much 2 full years. And really, that was driven by a burst in consumption. Spending was up 4%. That also was the most going back to 2021. And of course, the Biden administration was very quick to flex on this data, not just Treasury Secretary Yellen, but the president himself putting out a statement in which he said, quote, "The American economy continues to grow even as inflation has come down. It is a testament to the resilience of American consumers and workers supported by Bidenomics." He very much is trying to credit his policies and legislative accomplishments for the strength we are seeing in the economy. But we know he has great difficulty actually getting that to resonate with voters. A poll released just yesterday from The Economist and YouGov, which polled 1,500 people between October 1st and 24, so very recent, found just 40% approve of his handling of the economy, 53% disapprove, and 53% says the economy is actually getting worse. And it well indeed may get worse from here. A team at Bloomberg Economics thinks the strength of the third quarter really was due to temporary factors like Taylor Swift's Eras Tour and Barbenheimer, and they say that is just not sustainable with disposable income dropping. They think there will be negative payback in the fourth quarter as the Fed's tightening cycle continues to unfold and hit the economy. And on the subject of rates, that is something else Treasury Secretary Yellen talked about today, too.
We're seeing yields go up in most advanced countries. Part of the increase in yields, I think, is simply a reflection of the strength of the economy, the notion that interest rates will be higher for longer.
So, Joe, talking about interest rates being higher for longer, that is why bond yields are up, not because of the fiscal issue here in the U.S. and the fact that the Treasury just has to keep issuing more and more debt.
Can we just make another Barbenheimer?
I
guess
sure
we have to get the
economists
actors
would
back
love
to
that.
work. Yeah, it's amazing, though, how much we hear about the effect of this, of the concert tours and so forth, which are not going to be with us next year.
Although I would love for Taylor Swift and Beyonce to keep touring.
We can work on that, I think. Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lyons, thank you. Coming up, we get the view of the economy straight from the White House Council of Economic Advisors Chair Jared Bernstein. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television. U.S. economic growth topping estimates in the last quarter, with the GDP growing at the fastest pace in almost 2 years. Joining us now is Jared Bernstein, chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. Thank you so much for joining us. I know today is a fantastic day for you at the White House. A lot of individuals have been out talking about this GDP number, but I know you are also looking at the underlying trends of the GDP and growth for the U.S. economy. What are you exactly looking at, and what is it telling you?
Before I came out here to talk to you, I was using the Beveridge Nelson detrender, which is an econometric exercise to try to pull the trend out of a variable that bips and bops like GDP does. 4.9% is a great GDP growth rate, and I think we can explain that based on the strength of the job market. Also, some of the investment programs that we've been engaging in, and particularly the flow of private investment in to complement the public investment the president's helped legislate. The trend is important because you want to kind of extract from the bips and bops of the quarterly number and try to get at the underlying growth rate. And before I was interrupted in coming out here to talk to you, I was getting numbers that are slightly north of 2%, which is a very healthy, a very steady kind of GDP growth rate, probably consistent with our capacity.
Wow, Anne-Marie, we interrupted him in the middle of some pretty important work here. It means a lot to us to have your time here, Mr. Chairman. With that said, you've been talking about steady, sustainable growth as opposed to the explosive growth that was experienced coming out of the pandemic. Is that it then? Are you seeing it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's precisely what I was looking for. And by the way, one easy way to do this is look at year-over-year numbers, and there you see numbers that are, in the 2 to 3% range. Look, my point is this: there's a lot of ways to cut these numbers, but I think the fact of the case, despite what we know, many people, including your own service, a year ago assured us we'd be in a recession by now. Right. You don't have to, we can talk about looking around a corner. That's harder these days. But I don't see how you could look at a jobs report that gave us 336,000 jobs, a retail sales report that came in double expectation, and of course, this morning's GDP report with 4.9% growth, more than half of that contributed by consumer spending. Look, I like to take a close shave with Occam's razor. When you have a 70% consumer spending economy and a full employment labor market, absent exogenous shocks or a policy mistake, you should be okay. Now, there's a lot of shocks out there, and there's always potential for mistakes, and that's what keeps people like me busy. But the underlying structural growth that we've seen looks very solid to me.
So are you ruling out a recession from now and next year, including next year?
That's precisely what I mean when I say I'm not going to look around the corner. What I am ruling out is the idea that a year ago you could claim there was a 100% probability of a recession within the next year. That was almost literally to the day when that prediction was made, and clearly that's wrong. And so, look, I've had a lot of discussions today where a lot of commentators just want to throw one headwind after another and say, well, isn't this going to bring us down? Isn't that going to bring us down? And look, I get it. That's what I do. That's what you do. That's our responsibility is to look at headwinds and look at tailwinds. But we've got this very resilient economy that has been churning out upside surprises ever since President Biden helped get shots in arms and checks in pockets to help get families and businesses to the other side of the pandemic held whole and with a very quick return to a full employment job market. And again, when you have a 70% consumer spending economy and a job market generating now real wage gains because we've maintained the labor market strength while inflation has eased, you should expect to see some momentum going forward in these kinds of trends.
Jared, the Treasury Secretary paid us a visit today here at the Bloomberg Bureau. Janet Yellen weighed in on Americans' perception of the economy now and moving forward. I'd love to hear what she said and have you respond. Let's listen.
They do seem to feel good about their own personal finances. Surveys of job satisfaction suggest people feel good about their work, too. We've rarely seen higher numbers on job satisfaction, but they seem very worried about the economy and that things are not doing well.
You must be getting really tired of me asking you questions like this, Jared, but this seems to be the persistent trend here, right? We can't believe it's this good. We're just waiting for it to get worse. And I wonder if it's the impact of the longer-term investments the administration has made, infrastructure, the IRA, for instance, that actually need to start kicking in a more meaningful way for people to believe it? What do you think?
Well, I think that part of it is that, as you suggest, it's easy to forget that investment is sometimes investment is always partially a longer-term play. Now, when you look at our investments, you can see construction workers breaking ground on dozens of factories, particularly in the EV space, with $500 billion of private capital coming in from the sidelines to build manufacturing facilities, and that's great to see all over the country in geographical areas that have been historically left behind. And so that's construction worker work today, and that's great. But the real bang for those bucks comes down the road. So you have a point there. But I think a lot of the problem comes down to inflation. We've made real progress on inflation. But while we've talked a lot about disinflation, there are people out there who really want to hear about deflation. That is, we've touted the fact that inflation was north of 9%. Now it's been in the mid-3s for the CPI last seen. And that's helped to generate real wage gains. But those real wage gains are a few months old. And what has to happen is for people to reset their price level expectations. We have this thing at CEA we call a personal price vector, a PPV. And this is the idea that people keep in their head what a dozen eggs should cost, what a loaf of bread should cost, what a gallon of milk should cost, what a meal out with the kids should cost. And everybody has had to do a big readjustment of their PPV. That's been ongoing. But the thing that helps, the thing that makes that adjustment doable is when your buying power comes up, when your real wage starts to gain, so that you can buy a bag of groceries for the same, or a gallon of gas for the same hours of work that you could pre-pandemic. We're seeing those numbers come in line. So as enough time passes for people to reset their PPVs and for their buying power to come back, and we think that's going to help with these sentiment issues.
We just ran a Bloomberg and Morning Consult just ran a poll, and Trump is leading Biden in 5 of 7 key swing states. And the biggest issue, and what voters say, is a deficit on the economy. Trump leads by a 14-point margin. And Jared, I want to bring you this. His attempt at the president's brand to brand his economic platform as, quote, Bidenomics isn't working. Almost twice as many voters say Bidenomics is bad for the economy compared to those who say it's good. Independents view it even more negatively. Why is this not resonating with Americans?
Well, let me say one thing about that. I'm not going to get into head-to-head polls by a long shot. That's just not what I do. Let me talk a little bit about Bidenomics. I think sometimes, given the just deep partisan cleavages in this country, mentioning, mentioning the name Biden or Trump is going to invoke a certain amount of responses that look to me less about the economy and more to be about people's partisan sentiments. Ask people, and you've got the means to do this, so do this poll. Ask people what they think, not about Bidenomics, but about the components of Bidenomics. Ask them what they think about standing up a domestic industry in clean energy, in electric vehicles, in electric batteries. Ask them what they think about replacing lead pipes with safe pipes so kids can drink water without being poisoned. Ask them what they think about affordable internet broadband. Ask them what they think about standing up semiconductor industries in this country and the workplace training to make sure folks can get those good jobs. Ask them what they think about a president who supports empowering workers and has helped to create these positive wage gains that I've been talking about. If you ask them specifically about the components of Bidenomics, you get poll numbers, north of 80%.
All right, Jared, thank you for answering all of our questions today as we try to figure this out. I know we'll continue this conversation from the White House. The chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Jared Bernstein. Coming up on Balance of Power, our political panel joins as we look at the challenges facing the brand new Speaker of the House. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
We got to start passing bills here. We're going to do that with energy and water. We're going to get back on track. The Senate, by the way, they've done nothing. Can somebody please tell me what the Senate has passed since Speaker McCarthy was vacated? I think they passed a resolution on something, and that was it. So they're not serious on the other side of this building.
Congressman Byron Donalds on the steps of the Capitol earlier today. Let's assemble our political panel. Lisa Camuso-Miller, partner at Reset Public Affairs, is with us, along with Caitlin Legacki, partner at Four Corners Public Affairs. It's wonderful to see you both here in Washington. Lisa, you were a spokesperson, of course, for the Republican National Committee, and there have been questions about the Republican brand coming out of all of this. If you ask Byron Donalds, it's never looked better. Tom Emmer, who is the nominee for Speaker for, I think, 4 hours, said today, this was the greatest experience we've had in our modern democracy. What did we just learn going through this exercise?
that we need to get back to work, Joe.
Okay.
I mean, more than anything else. So everybody can do all the celebrating that they need to do, but let's face it, this was not a good look for the Congress. So it's
not
time to...
Not the greatest exercise?
No, I don't think so. I mean, maybe it was, and maybe they feel like they found the right man for the job, but I think all of that remains to be seen. I think that there's going to be a very short honeymoon. We've got 22 days until the shutdown. Nobody wants the government to shut down, so there's a lot of work to do. The debt is out of control, zillions of dollars, right? So they've got a lot of work to do. And we have a speaker who's never been in the speaker's office before. He's never been in leadership. So while they're saying that this is a good look for them, I tend to disagree.
Yeah, there's going to be quite a learning curve, isn't there, Lisa? Caitlin, what we do know is that he went over to the White House today. He did see President Biden, but this meeting was really with Shalonda Young to talk about the budget. It was with Jake Sullivan to talk about the national security concerns. How do you envision this White House working with the Speaker Johnson?
You know, I think that remains to be seen. President Biden has always been very clear that he wants to work together. He wants to find compromise where he can. And I think he's very sincere about that. But, you know, I think a lot of Democrats have concerns that they don't have a history of negotiating with him. You know, one of their concerns with McCarthy was whether he could negotiate in good faith on behalf of his conference. So in the event that they have a hard time negotiating with him, I'd expect a lot of the power to move back over to the Senate so that Schumer and McConnell can hash things out beforehand and then work with the House to get things across the finish line.
Lisa, you worked for a prior Speaker of the House, and you know what goes into this. You know the staffing issues. What does this new Speaker have to get done? What's he learning right now? As Anne-Marie mentioned, he had a briefing at the White House today that I suspect was quite illuminating, particularly when it came to national security threats, as he sat down with Jake Sullivan. But he's got a security detail now himself, right? He has to hire a bunch of people. How else are things about to change for him? How much catching up does he need?
Well, he's got 13 people on his staff now. He'll go to a staff of 35. The good news is that a lot of the people that are in leadership, staff that are in leadership, are shifting now because the former speaker is now out and there's a new one in. So a lot of candidates will likely step into those roles. That would be my expectation. Okay. On top of that, though, he's got a long list of issues that have to be taken care of. And the American people don't want this crisis to crisis governing anymore. They want to see action and they want to see things happen, which I think empowers Steve Scalise. It empowers Tom Emmer. It empowers the chairman and all the different committees. And I think you're going to see a rise around this new speaker and see support for him because there needs to be. And that, I think, empowers a lot of the other elected leadership people on the Republican side. And that, I think, could potentially be a good thing if that coalition stays together.
Lisa, when do you think the potential honeymoon will end for Speaker Johnson? What happens when he does something that is more in line with the moderates of the Republican Party and not the hard right flank that ousted McCarthy?
I mean, I think today is the honeymoon, Anne-Marie, and I think tomorrow, if he doesn't start to work, there's no time. We've got 22 days until the shutdown. They've got all of these other issues that are lining up, and he really has to get to work. So he's going to rely very heavily on the leadership. He's also going to have to rely on the Senate. I mean, he obviously had a good meeting today with Mitch McConnell. He's going to have to work with the White House. There are just too many crises, too many things that are happening all at the same time for him to step into this and be anything but someone that can lead and can show that we can get the work done here in America.
Caitlin, are you worried about a swing to the right here in the Republican conference when it comes to his evangelical approach, when it comes to right-to-life issues, when it comes to same-sex marriage, for instance, when it comes to the fact that he's an election denier?
Yeah, I think where Democrats need to be careful is attacking him for his faith. That's an easy political trap to fall into. But when you look at his history of political positions on issues like abortion, gay marriage, climate change, denying the 2020 election, those are all extremist positions. They are outside the mainstream. And now that he's speaker, he has to decide whether he wants to govern for all of America or for the narrow minority of Americans who agree with him. So does he get a clean slate? It's up to him. It depends on how he wants to start this new role and how he's approaching.
But I mean, as a Democrat, you're willing to give him that opportunity?
I am. I know a lot of people aren't, but, you know, the fact of the matter is, like, Congress is not functioning. The vast majority of American voters don't blame Republicans alone. They blame both parties for Congress not functioning. And I think Democrats need to give him a chance to govern from the middle. And if he chooses not to, then we can have that conversation.
All right, coming back up. Lisa and Caitlin will still be with us as we discuss another mass shooting, a horrific shooting that rocked the country last night. We'll take a look at voter attitudes toward gun legislation next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
Let me just communicate on behalf of House Democrats how heartbroken we are by the tragic events in Maine, the killing and slaughter once again of innocent Americans, families broken, individuals injured, fighting for their lives, and we stand with the people of Maine.
Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York reacting to the horrific deadly shooting in Maine last night. This year, there have been 566 mass shootings in the United States, according to the Gun Violence Archive. Our panel is back with us, Lisa Camusa-Miller and Caitlin Legacki. Caitlin, let's start with you. There's a massive manhunt underway. We still do not know where this individual is, but we do know he killed 18 individuals. And President Biden came out with a statement today, and he said, in the wake of another tragedy, I urge Republican lawmakers in Congress to fulfill their duty to protect the American people. Given this Congress, could there actually be meaningful gun legislation?
You know, I think the American people are so frustrated with this because there are common sense solutions that we know are going to work. Universal background checks, eliminating, large scale magazines, eliminating assault rifles. 81% of people support these things. It's one of the rare areas of compromise, but where there is not compromise is in Congress. And that goes between Democrats and Republicans. But also, as we've seen over the past few weeks, the House Republican Conference is much further to the right than even the Senate Republican caucus. And so, we know what to do about this. There are pretty easy answers that could get some of these weapons off the streets. And for reasons that remain unclear, Congress refuses to act.
Well, let's just say it out loud then. This terrible tragedy will bring nothing to change in Washington. The new speaker talked about this as well, Lisa, and he issued a call for prayer. Is that all we're going to get?
It really feels like that's probably all we're going to get. But the other thing, too, that we also need to consider, not only because there are families that are really hurting right now in Maine, and that is the biggest tragedy of all, but also to the law enforcement officers that are out in Maine trying to track down this predator and find those as we speak. And those are the other things that we also need to do to make sure that this doesn't happen, is also make sure that our law enforcement has all of the training and the support that they need in order to be ready for these kinds of tragedies in the absence of any legislation that does get these horrible weapons off the street.
When you look at some of the polling, Lisa, Economist YouGov poll says 53% say guns is an important issue to them. 63% of them Democrats, but 49% of Republicans and 58% of independents. At some point, will something be done to enact some sort of legislation?
Well, Anne-Marie, I would hope so, but let's follow the money, right? A lot of this has to do with the fact that there are organizations that don't support gun reform and don't want to see that happen, and they are backing many, many candidates that are in the Congress, but also all leading all across the country. So that's the big piece of it. It's not just about getting the legislation done. It's about having the courage to stand up to some of these big organizations that are putting money into standing in the way of any reform as it ought to happen.
Well, so let's just project that part of the conversation onto the campaign trail.
Yeah.
Caitlin, will issues like gun control, like abortion, as you mentioned earlier, be a factor for voters more than, say, the economy in 24?
It's hard to say. Every election is either a referendum on the incumbent or a choice between two candidates. And it's still a little bit early to tell. But the thing that, Biden has going in his favor is that Donald Trump is also a former president. And so they're going to have a chance to compare their records on the economy. We know that abortion is a huge motivating issue for women, moderates, independents in the suburbs. Gun control is, according to some polling, the country's #1 public health concern. And I think where Democrats have to start fighting smarter is in red and purple states, talking about how, we don't want to take your shotguns, your hunting rifles. These are weapons designed to kill people. I grew up in Alaska. My dad's best friend was a hunting guide. We always used to say, if you need a machine gun to go hunting, you're not a good hunter. And so I think there is a very clear middle ground where we can all live, and that's where we need to get as soon as possible.
And we should note Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner, of course, of Bloomberg LP, the parent company of Bloomberg Television, is a donor to groups that support gun control, including Everytown for Gun Safety, Caitlin Legacki of Four Corners Public Affairs, and Lisa Camusa-Miller. Thank you so much both for joining us. Joe, that does it for me in New York and you in D.C. See you tomorrow.
Got it. This is Bloomberg.